sure. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Welcome, everyone, to our series, Lean into Your Faith, Meeting Professional Challenges with Spiritual Resources. This is a series that features the wisdom of professional women who have achieved a high level of leadership and have also led from the foundation of their faith. And so these women, hailing from many different sectors, disciplines, and faith backgrounds, have encountered some challenges along the way, but have ultimately triumphed over these challenges. And so they come to our series to share their expertise along with helpful tools and advice, which we as women of faith can utilize in our efforts to hopefully build some confidence, live out our faith, and pursue our personal and professional passions for global change. Just a little bit about the format of this webinar. The webinar is an open chat format. So we encourage you to engage in the chat box below. Introduce yourself, share your own wisdom, and ask any questions. Our speaker will be providing approximately 15 to 20 minutes of presentation, at which time she'll open up for a little bit of Q&A and address any questions that you've put in that chat box. And so just as an introduction for our speaker today, our featured speaker is Dr. Julie Shimer, and she'll be sharing with us some of her wisdom on spirituality and skyscrapers, advancement as women of faith in the corporate sector. And Julie is a dear friend who serves as a board member for the Institute for Global Engagement and as an advisory council member for IGE's Center for Women, Faith, and Leadership. Julie's previous experience includes serving as CEO and Chief Innovation Officer for Welch Allyn. For those who don't know, Welch Allyn is a $700 million revenue global manufacturer of medical equipment. And during her tenure there, the company implemented strategic planning processes, exited non-strategic businesses, and acquired new businesses. Completed a $30 million expansion of headquarters building and grew their revenue and profitability to record levels. And so prior to her time at Welch Allyn, Julie was CEO of Vocera Communications, which is a wireless communications company in San Jose, California. And under her leadership, the company raised $30 million in venture funding and launched the first product and achieved a run rate of $52 million in annual revenue. Julie has also held the roles of Vice President and General Manager of 3Com Corporation's Networking Products Division and Motorola Inc.'s Paging Division. She's a former Vice President of the Semiconductor Products Sector of Motorola and held positions at noteworthy businesses such as AT&T Bell Laboratories and Bethlehem Steel Company. And very impressive, Julie was issued a United States patent and is the author of 10 technical papers. Since retiring in 2012 from Welch Allyn, Julie has served on the board of directors of Netgear, Earthlink, and Wycliffe USA, along with many others. She's a senior member of the Society of Women Engineers, a member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and a member of the National Association of Corporate Directors. Julie has a BS in physics from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and an MS and PhD in electrical engineering from Lehigh University. So it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Julie and hand the microphone over to her. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julie.
Kristen, thank you for your kind invitation. It's an honor for me to speak to the CWFL community that's making such a positive impact on the empowerment of women and their role in peacemaking and advancing religious freedom. As women of faith, I want to encourage you to become a lifelong volunteer. I use the term volunteer in a different context than is typical in American parlance. Typically, when we think of a volunteer, we think of working for free. But in contrast, I'm referring to the American Heritage Dictionary definition, which is a volunteer is one who performs a service or assumes an obligation of one's own free will. The key phrase here is free will, realizing that wherever you are and whatever you do, you have a choice, and you bring to that choice your faith and your values. So it's in this context that I use the word volunteer. When I was 42 years old, I was the first woman in Motorola's semiconductor product sector to be promoted to vice president. At that time, several women came to me and asked if I would address them on the subject of career advancement. And what emerged from that presentation were 4 myths that many of us hold to be true. And I'd like to quickly review these 4 myths and then go into a Q&A session. The first myth is that my manager is responsible for making sure I have a rewarding and productive career. The truth is, you must set a career goal. You view yourself as a victim of your circumstances, or you can be a person who uses your circumstances to advance. You react to your environment, or you can initiate change in your environment. You choose to be a thermometer, acclimating to your circumstances and reporting them as a thermometer reads out a temperature, or you can choose to be a thermostat, being aware of your circumstances and calling on the power of your knowledge, experience, faith, friends, family, community, alma mater, and mentors to change those circumstances. As a thermostat calls on the power of the furnace to change the temperature. You are in charge of your life, and as a volunteer, you need to set your own goals. I first set a career goal in my 8th grade science class. We viewed an 8mm film that was produced by Bell Laboratories, describing the research done by Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias that led to the discovery of the background radiation of the universe, for which they eventually won the Nobel Prize in Physics. And funnily enough, I knew right then and there that one day I wanted to work at Bell Labs. 17 years later, I realized my goal and was hired as a member of technical staff at Bell Laboratories. After I'd been working at the company for about a year, I attended a colloquium at the Homedale, New Jersey facility. At mealtime, I went through the buffet line, picked up my tray, and took an open seat at the end of the table. I turned to the person sitting next to me to introduce myself. It was Robert Wilson. Right then and there, I realized that I had achieved my career goal. I was 32 years old, and a feeling of panic set in. Now what? I needed a new career goal. So how do you come up with a new career goal? Well, I've come to the conclusion that there are 4 factors to be considered. The first is time frame. At age 22, it's hard to craft a suitable 20 or 30-year goal, but it is very possible to visualize what you want to be doing in 5 years or 10 years. Over the years since I achieved my first career goal, I set my sights on becoming a laboratory director, then a general manager, and finally a CEO. As I achieved each goal, I took time to formulate my next goal, considering the remaining 3 factors. Maybe, unlike me, you do not visualize yourself in a linear career progression. Maybe your goals have to do with family, geography, or experience. But whatever your goals are, choosing a direction and working to achieve it makes life a challenging adventure and gives you a sense of accomplishment each step along the way. The second factor is ability. As I thought about my next career goal, I had to take stock of my abilities. Right out of college, I wanted to join the astronaut program. But at that time, you had to have 20/20 eyesight. I needed corrective lenses, so being an astronaut was not an option. Some people choose to do something entirely different. I enjoyed playing musical instruments and being part of an orchestra in high school and college, but I lacked the skill required to make being a professional musician a realistic career goal. I needed to assess what I did have: a PhD in electrical engineering, a track record of peer-reviewed research, good communication skills, problem-solving skills, and probably most importantly, persistence. These qualities led me to believe that I could aspire to become a laboratory director, but only after achieving a good performance rating, management experience, and learning from a mentor how to prepare for the job. If you are unsure whether you have the abilities to do a job you are interested in, ask a trusted teacher, friend, or family member who knows you well, or coworker. They will often see things that you miss. The third factor to take into consideration is your passion. This is the key to becoming a true volunteer as you choose to do what you love. Every day, I look forward to going to work. I was passionate about what I did. The day I woke up and dreaded going to work is the day I needed to start looking for something else to do. One benefit of doing what you love is that you will be energized by your work rather than drained by it. You will be self-motivated, energize your peers, and make a positive difference in your workplace. Hopefully, your experience has given you a taste of what you like to do. Some of you may be very clear. You like to work on a team, or you'd rather work alone. You enjoy being outdoors all day, or you prefer an office environment. You're an early morning person, or you'd rather work into the evening. You prefer structure, or you like a flexible working environment. You like to lead, or you prefer to be led. Getting clear about your passion, what you like to do, is critically important. It can make the difference between being energized by your work or being miserable, making a difference or feeling stuck. Do what you love. And finally, when formulating a career goal, consider your values. Are your personal values consistent with your career goal? Let me give you a couple of examples. If you value sitting down to dinner every evening with your family, you don't want to be a CEO. It entails long days and lots of travel, and a values mismatch can make you miserable. If it is important to you to do something with lasting social value, you will probably not be happy writing code that generates ringtones. This is your life. You want to volunteer to do something that matters to you. What are your values? Can you write them down? Ideally, you want your values to match those of your workplace. You will find many workplaces share your values of integrity and respect for the individual. Can you feel good about the product or service you or your company provides? Can you do this work while practicing your faith or maintaining relationships that are important to you? Is this goal consistent with the legacy you want to leave? Dory Yoakum, one of my mentors at Bell Labs, once made this suggestion to me. Think about what you want to have said at your retirement party. How do you want to be remembered? Then reverse engineer your career. Dory told me that rarely do people look back over their careers and wish that they had spent more time at work or more time at the office. They may wish that they had spent more time with family or friends or giving back to their community. As a lifelong volunteer, I can honestly say that I appreciate every opportunity that I've had during my career. Now let's go to the second myth. The second myth is that my work will be recognized and I will receive the promotion that I deserve. But the truth is that you need to ask for what you want. This is particularly hard for people of faith because many of us hold a belief that we should put others before ourselves, or that we should do unto others as we want them to do unto us. But think about it. If we do not ask for what we want, we are asking the people around us to be mind readers. When I was at Bell Labs, I was a mentor to a woman who was an engineer working on some of the very first memory chips. This was quite a while ago. And she was a memory chip designer, and she was very good at it. She thought that she had earned the right to become the project leader for the next big project coming down the line. And she was disappointed that her boss had not asked her. And I said to her, well, have you explained to your boss that this is what you desire and this is what your hope is? And she said no. So we arranged a meeting where I was present as she shared with her boss her aspirations and hopes for her career. And he said, I would never consider you for that position. And he proceeded to explain why. She had been continuing to work in that organization, hoping for a career path that would never occur. And she didn't know because she hadn't asked. After talking to her supervisor about what was possible, she decided to move into another group and was able to have a very successful career that she enjoyed. Myth 3, I can achieve my career goals through hard work. Many of us think that we will be rewarded for our hard work, that it only takes hard work to get ahead. But the truth is that you need all the help you can get. And none of us really achieve our career goals alone. So this is the type of help that I think we need to get. First of all, once you set your career goal, which was myth 1, and you've communicated your goal, which is myth 2, you can start to get feedback. You can share that goal with coworkers, with mentors, with trusted advisors, and with your immediate supervisor. Ask people what they think of your goal and how they think about your performance relative to your goal. Do they think you're already prepared for that position, or do you need to do some other things to prepare? Identify your gaps. Now, I want to say something specific about getting performance feedback, because I think this is key to managing your career, but most of us overlook it. Most of us are hopeful that when we go in for a performance review session, or when we get feedback about the work we do, that what we'll hear is positive. But I can assure you that positive feedback does not help you advance your career. What you really need to know in order to advance your career is you need to know, what are your failures? What are your gaps? What are the areas where you need to improve? If you can identify those areas for improvement, you can put together a plan to close those gaps and prepare yourself for the career step that you want to take. The last thing I think is very important in managing your career is to find a mentor or mentors. And the easiest way to do this, I think, is to look at someone who is already doing what it is you aspire to do and ask them for an informational interview. Just ask them if you could come and find out from them what it is they do, how it is that they prepared, and what advice they could give you as a person who would like to prepare for their job. The worst thing that could happen in this circumstance of you asking someone for an informational interview is that they would say no. But I can assure you that most people will feel very flattered that you're interested in them and how they perform in their job, and most will be very willing to offer a hand. And once you establish communication with that person, it may be possible that you find a connection and you can ask them if they would be a mentor for you. So having a mentor who can give you advice about your progress towards closing those gaps between your current level of ability and experience and your desired goal can be very helpful. Let me just go to the 4th career myth here just briefly. I got here the hard way, and others don't need my help to get ahead. As you begin to make progress in your career towards your goals, perhaps following some of the steps I've already outlined, you may feel like, okay, I'm achieving this, I'm making progress, I've done all that work, and others will just have to find their own way. But what I've found is that you can personally benefit from being a mentor as well. I've always taken the opportunity to, whether formally through formal mentorship programs or informally, mentor people in my work environment. And what I found is that I benefit as much from being a mentor as those whom I mentor. I learn, particularly as I moved up in the career ladder and got farther and farther away from the people who do the actual work on the factory floor or on the CAD program at the computer, is that I often got disconnected from information. And I don't think that anyone was deliberately trying to keep information from me, but that's just the way it works. As the organizations get bigger and you move up, it's harder and harder to know what's going on at the ground level. And when you mentor someone, you can get good information, and you can also get feedback about your performance as a leader from them, as well as helping them identify their gaps and put together plans to close them. So I'm going to stop here with just that sort of brief introduction to how I think about managing a career, and open it up to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Julie. I see that Sarah is typing. So is Courtney. But I will kick us off. I'll take the advantage of the first question here. And I'm just going to paste my question into the chat box. What advice would you share with women of faith who maybe don't have a lot of wiggle room for advancement in their career, either because of an inability to afford the education and training, or maybe restrictions due to their family situation? I'm just wondering if there's any, I'm calling them micro movements, that can help women kind of in a season where it may not be possible to take some of the bigger steps to advance their career. Um, I hope that makes sense. I just have a
Yeah,
lot of friends kind of in that season of life right now, so I was just curious
yeah.
about what you.
Let me just pop back to this slide where I showed about setting a career goal. So what you're really talking about is time frame. So you may be in a time frame where it's not realistic for you, for example, to work outside the home, or where you don't have the, like you're saying, you don't have the economic resources. But that doesn't mean that you can't assess what you do have and what contribution you want to make. So I think a person can make a contribution from almost any position, from a position of wealth or poverty, from a position of a lot of education or a little. If you can find something to do that's consistent with your passions and your values, and maybe it is being a volunteer in the sense that we think of volunteering, which is not working for pay or not having a very rigid schedule, but still being able to schedule in maybe one day a month or 1 week a month or 1 hour a day where you can make a contribution online or in a community group as a volunteer, so that you can continue to develop your skills. So when you get to that point where you do have the time, or you do have the family situation where you can maybe, step on the accelerator pedal and accelerate your career, that you have been continuing to make progress. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people that I've talked to have kind of looked at it as an all or nothing, but it's good to kind of hear the importance of just staying involved in that specific issue, even if it's one day a month, in order to kind of micro move you forward. So yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
You're
And it
welcome.
looks like it looks like Sarah has a question here. I'm just gonna read it off. Thank you,
Sure.
Julie. You mentioned getting feedback on areas for improvement slash gaps. What are some good ways to approach an advisor to get this kind of more critical feedback? Any suggestions about phrasing questions?
Yeah, I think that sometimes the best place to get this information is from your direct supervisor or a mentor in the organization. It could also be a coworker. So, and you might approach each one slightly differently. But let me start with your manager, and then I'll talk about some of the others, a mentor and coworker. Most managers should be giving people performance review on a regular basis, at a minimum once a year, in many organizations more often than that. So I think it's always okay to schedule a meeting with your supervisor and say, I would really like to receive some feedback on what I can do to improve my performance and my job. And I think most supervisors will sort of start, well, with this is what you are doing well, but you may want to start, you may want to talk about each thing they say. Like, for example, someone may say to you, you're a good communicator. And you might ask some additional questions about, well, why do you say that? Could you give me examples? Is there anything I could do to improve my communications? Maybe I'm good orally, but I could be better a written communicator, or maybe I'm a better written communicator. Maybe I dominate a conversation too much or whatever. I think you can just sort of explore with your manager areas where you are strong and areas where you have opportunity for improvement. Most managers they know where you're weak and where you can improve, but they have long ago stopped telling people, giving people performance improvement feedback, because so often people deny that feedback. They either don't want to hear it, or they make excuses, or maybe they sit there and take it all in and then they don't do anything with it. And it's actually not easy, as you can imagine. Like, it's not easy for you to give people so-called constructive feedback. It's not easy for a manager either. And if they know that advice is going to be ignored or refuted, or if the person's going to get upset at hearing it, the manager just stops giving it. So I think the most important thing you can do to get that feedback from your manager is to smile and say thank you. So for every little bit of performance improvement feedback they give you, be grateful for it. Be happy for it. I mean, it may make you want to cry, but just wait till you get out of the room to do that. You want that manager to have a good experience. Say, thank you for that feedback. I'm really going to consider it. I'm going to think about what I can do about it, rather than agree or disagree with it, or ignore it. And even better, come back a week or two later with maybe an email or a conversation where you say, I've given that some thought, and here are some things I propose to do to improve it. And that you can actually loop that person who gave you that feedback into developing your performance improvement plan as well. If you're talking to a coworker or an advisor, you might approach it this way. You might say, I have a long-term career goal, or I have an intermediate-term career goal of doing this position. And I feel like I have experience in these aspects of it, but not so much in those. What do you think about my ability to close those gaps? What would you recommend in terms of experiences I should get or education I should get? Most organizations will actually, particularly if you take an active interest in it, they'll give you opportunities to maybe join a special project or take a class that's either offered in your community or offered by the company to help you improve your skills. So I think it's a slightly different approach, whether it's your manager or if it's a coworker. But the most important thing is to show your willingness to receive the feedback, consider it, and do something with it.
Yeah, that's very helpful advice. I hadn't actually considered the difficulty on the part of the manager to kind of provide that feedback and how you can encourage the continuance of that. So thank you. I see Courtney has another question down here. She says, thank you so much for all your information and advice. So much of this is helpful. What advice do you give someone who has multiple career goals or career aspirations and doesn't know which one to choose? How to choose when we are at a crossroads?
Well, that's like all these questions, it's a great question. To me, I always think the most important thing is the passion. I mean, obviously, you don't want to do something that's inconsistent with your values. But to me, if you're passionate about something, that is what really will determine your willingness to put in the extra effort you need to achieve success in that career. So as you look at your options, you may actually want to sort of lay them out and write down pros and cons of each. You might want to talk about people, particularly if they're very diverse. You might want to do those informational interviews I talked about with people in each of those careers, and just be aware of your own reaction as you learn more about that career path more about what it would take to get there. Is that something that excites you and energizes you, or is it something that you feel, boy, that would be hard. That's a hard road to get there, and I'm not sure I'd enjoy that path. So my first sort would be on passion. And all else being equal, then I think about it as a time frame question. When I first got out of college, it was very typical for people to go into a career and stay in even a particular company for their entire career, for 30 or 40 years, even 50 years, and just do that. Maybe not do exactly the same thing, but progress in a very linear progression in one field, in one company for their whole lives. And that's really changing. Most people, maybe even your age, Courtney, are thinking, what would be a satisfying career for me, what I would like to look back at on my retirement party, is that I did 3 or 4 different things that enriched my life and helped me to make contributions in a variety of different areas. So if that's the case, and your choices are all pretty equivalent as far as your passion is concerned, you might just want to think about what's more realistic in one time frame or another. I mean, is this maybe, and I'm thinking back to a family situation, because when you have children and what your child care arrangements are has a huge impact on a woman's ability to work. But maybe right now you don't have children, and this would be the time to take the job that has a lot of travel. And then when you do have children, you might think about moving into a different career choice or a different career path that allows you to work from home, for example. So I'd also think about that time frame. Is it a job that's more physically demanding? You might want to do it when you're younger. If it's one that's more sedentary, maybe when you're older. So those are the kinds of things I would use. But I would lay out all your choices, and do some analysis on them, and then, of course, pray about them and prayerfully consider, is God calling you to one more than another?
Absolutely. I was about to insert my own question here, but I see Hien beat me to it. She says, "Could you please talk about giving feedback on areas for improvement / gaps? How a supervisor / mentor should frame / give frank and helpful advice to his or her subordinates, mentees, about areas for improvement?"
Sure. There's a lot of books and classes about this, and I would encourage you to just, go on Amazon and look at books about giving feedback and read a few of them. The most important thing that I found as a manager is that it's important to it's important to have the best interests of the person in mind. So often managers get so freaked out about giving feedback. It gets to be all about them, all about the manager. Oh man, I got to do this. I have to put in a report. I hate doing. Most managers hate it. I hate doing this. And it gets to be all about them. And the most important thing I've learned is for a manager to be thinking about, what can I say that will be helpful? It's almost the flip. It's almost the reverse of what I told you as the person trying to get ahead, to think about it from the standpoint of what it is you can contribute and what information people are willing to share with you. So now, on the other side of it, as a manager, you need to think about, this person has career goals and aspirations. And if I want to win their hearts and minds so that they'll work hard for me, I need to become an ally on achieving their goals. So if they see you as an ally, they're more willing to listen to constructive feedback. And I usually would make sure I'd give balanced feedback. This can backfire if you have a person who really has a serious performance problem, because they may only hear the positive and not the negative. But I usually try to give balance, and I try to think about what will preserve this person's dignity. It's not like they're a bad person. It's they've got a skill gap or an education gap, or maybe a motivation gap. And so I usually give people feedback in the context of, what do they need to do in order to achieve growth in their own career in order to achieve a better performance rating, in order to achieve the opportunity to get a promotion or expand their areas of responsibility. And so I think when you approach it like that and explain to folks, this is what you do well, but if you want to do this next job, it will be important for you to close these gaps. That's how I would do it. I hope that's helpful, Ken, but if not, ask me more detailed questions.
Thank you. I see that.
Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say that's really important is practice. So I think role playing really helps. So if you can get someone, another supervisor or a friend that's not even at work or whatever, who can role play it with you, and you can practice giving feedback before you actually have to do it, that really helps me a lot. Sorry.
No, actually, I hadn't thought about that, but I could see that being very, very helpful, especially if you're nervous with something, kind of having a person to bounce it off of. So I'm going to type a question in of my own. I feel like we're hitting hard on this constructive criticism theme, but I have a lot of questions about it. So you've spoken a lot about the importance of constructive critique. And I'm kind of wondering, just in terms of the flip side, what's the internal dialogue that's important to take yourself through prior to going into a meeting where you're looking for that negative feedback? So maybe how does the faith factor into your mental preparation to hear criticism?
Well, I know whether I'm giving feedback or receiving feedback, I am praying before I go into it. Of course, I pray a lot before I do a lot of things, but I'm praying before I go into that session because I'm asking God to give me an open mind and an open heart to receive that feedback in the spirit in which it's given, whether or not I agree with it. And I think it's really good not to make a judgment, not to judge the feedback at the moment, but just to absorb it. So I go in with prayer, asking for an open heart and mind, and I go in saying I'm not going to judge it right now. And I will tell you, this is a learning experience for me. I was probably 40 years old before I learned to take constructive feedback. I was one of those people who was just like always in denial or thought if you don't agree with me, you're wrong and I'm right. But I actually had a very helpful coworker who helped me see that there are many points of view that can be right from the point of view of that person. And that if we don't hear other people's viewpoints, then we're missing critical information. And that's really sort of a mental orientation to hearing. I'm not saying you need to agree with everything they're saying, but don't disagree in front of them because then they'll shut down. So get everything you can out of it, and then later you can reflect and you can prayerfully reflect on whether any of that is true for you and whether it's something you should act on. And I think if you approach it that way, you'll often get very interesting new insights about yourself. You may be surprised with what you hear. And then let me just talk about the practical fact of sometimes hearing constructive feedback or performance improvement feedback is very hard because it strikes us right where we are. And sometimes it's not given. Sometimes it's not given in the spirit I talked about giving it. Sometimes it's just given like, you're creating a problem for me because you're this way, or you do that, or you've got to stop doing this, or whatever. And some of that might actually strike at the heart of your own values or your passion, and that's really hard to hear. So I actually heard a speaker say one of the good things to do when you're listening to that kind of feedback and it's affecting you emotionally, like you feel like you want to break into tears, is that you can just you can clench your fists and dig your fingernails into your fists so it hurts, so you won't cry. And then as soon as you leave, just go into the ladies' room and bawl your head off. That's fine. Just don't do it there, because if you do, that person will shut down. And you need to hear what they have to say. Because whether or not it's true, it's their perception of you. And if you're not dealing with the reality of their perception, you're not dealing with the facts of your work environment.
Yeah, I guess I had never thought about kind of how your reactions or how you counter what they're saying serves to kind of shut down that feedback, um, and kind of robs you of the opportunity to hear a different perspective. So even though it's hard, that was really helpful. Um, I have
That's
another
hard
question.
to
I'm
do. It
just
takes
gonna.
practice.
Yeah, yeah, no, it definitely does. I have not conquered that one yet myself. So, I have another question. I'm gonna keep hogging the Q&A. Unless other people have questions, feel free to type them in. But um, I have a question about boundaries. I've actually had this similar question from a number of people in our CWFL network, and hypothetically, let's say you get a great job opportunity in a position that you're really passionate about, but your boss keeps kind of pushing personal professional boundaries, asking you to do things that are clearly outside of your position, whether it's bring them dinner or babysit their kids or so on and so forth. How do you go about kind of setting these boundaries early and clearly, in a way that maybe doesn't rob you of this position that you're so passionate about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure I have a really good answer because I think in the US corporate world, that is actually so inappropriate that if it happens, you can just say no and it can't hurt your career. And if it does, you just go to HR and say this is happening, and it's the consequence isn't going to be on you, it's going to be on your boss. But I understand that in many contexts, maybe in ministry contexts or NGOs or in other countries, the boundaries aren't quite so clear. So I think this is a question. If you go back to our list of career goals, I refer to these so often in my own life, really every day. Think about your values and think about what you really value. And this goes back to what I was saying about being a volunteer. If you are being taken advantage of, can that really be such a good position for you? Uh, I mean, I think we should all think of ourselves as volunteers all the time. So if I have a boss who's taking unfair advantage, and we know it can be quite serious, trying to take sexual advantage or something. Um, if that advantage taking is crossing a values line for you, then you really need to get out of that job. I mean, just quite frankly, you need to find another job. And so it's helpful for you to know in your own mind what your value boundaries are as you enter a job. And as to how to set the boundaries uh, with yourself, I think that takes prayer, reflection, and maybe even a little bit of experience in the job to know what challenges might come to your boundaries. But once you're very clear about those boundaries, then I think you can have a conversation with your boss that says something like, I really enjoy what I'm doing and I came here to contribute to this, but I I am not being paid for, and I am not comfortable doing that, whatever that is, making dinner or um, babysitting the kids or whatever, or having a sexual relationship, right? I'm just not comfortable with that. So I think you need to state it clearly. And one of two things can happen. The person who's making these requests or demands will either back down and say, I value what you do here at work enough that I'm going to respect your boundaries. Or they're going to say, well, if you want to work here, that's what you're going to have to put up with. And if it's crossing a values line, then I'd say it's time to start looking for another job. I'm not saying that you need to throw your office keys on the table and quit right that moment, but you should definitely be thinking about, okay, where else can I make this contribution? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it very much does. Yeah, it's I think that especially when a livelihood is connected to these positions, there's been two people who have actually asked me this question of, I love this job, I really need the money. How do I go about kind of setting these boundaries so that I maintain my own values and self-respect and yet don't lose out on this great opportunity? So, yeah, that was
And
that was
sometimes
very
the answer
helpful.
may be, yeah, sometimes the answer may be it's not possible. But that doesn't mean you can't start looking for something else.
Right, exactly, exactly. It looks like Sarah has a question along a similar vein. What about in the context where the requests are not necessarily against HR policy, but more about requests for doing work that's beyond your job description? So, how can you maintain your boundaries, but also take the opportunities to advance your career and gain recognition for the additional duties you're doing that can advance your career?
Yeah, it's a good question. And when you first asked the question, Kristen, I was thinking that it was more like Sarah's question. So, and I mean, both of these circumstances happen, and again, it's a little bit about your own career goals and your values, and also the values of the organization that you're working in. So, in corporate America, for the most part, if you want to advance, you've got to do more than your job. For the most part, um, I mean, if you want to you want to go to work for 40 hours a week, do exactly what's in your job description and do it very well, you can do that. You can do it for your whole career, and that's fine. There is nothing wrong with it, but you are not going to advance. Most often, the way people advance is by demonstrating that they can do more than is in their job description. And then at some point, they're given the opportunity to take the pay grade. So people do the work and then they get the pay grade. That's pretty much how it works. Now I'm going to flip back to in corporate America, and I'm not so sure, Sarah, I know you're in an NGO or a nonprofit, and I'm not as sure how that works. But I want to flip over to this second myth because it's related here, is because you're asking the question, well, how about if I'm doing that work and it's not being recognized and I'm not being rewarded for it? So I'm going to go back to that statement that is that you need to ask for what you want. And so if you're continually being asked to do, and I'll tell you when this frequently happens in the corporate world, is when there are expense cuts. And so maybe a 10-person department goes down to an 8-person department, and then everybody's asked to take on an additional, 15% uh, work that they hadn't had to do before. And um, this can be an opportunity for you, because if you take on work that actually helps prepare you for your next career move, it's a big plus. But if you have a value system in the company or a manager who is just going to take advantage of this situation and you will never be rewarded for it, then you need to know that too. And again, either refuse that extra work and say, I'm not being paid to do that. I'm going to do what I'm paid for, and recognize that it potentially could have a negative impact on your ability to advance, or look for an opportunity where the values of the company are more aligned with your values. But I'll give you an example from my own career. When I was at Bell Laboratories and I was a member of technical staff, I was given an opportunity uh, to participate in a project which required a lot of international travel. Now, I was married, but I didn't have children, and I loved travel, and I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity, and I raised my hand and signed up for it right away. And it actually positioned me to be able to take on a supervisory role very quickly because of the experience I had with this international uh, work and opportunity interacting with another organization. There were two other women in my department who had children, and they could not raise their hand and say, I'll take that job, because they could not take that amount of travel. And they missed that, therefore they missed the opportunity to build the capacity to become a supervisor that I had been able to build through that opportunity. And you can say it's not fair, and in a way it isn't, but that is kind of the fact of life. If you are able to take on some additional responsibility and get credit for it, and again, this is asking for what you want. Say, okay, I'm going to take on this additional responsibility, but my career goal is X. So how will that help me progress towards my career goal? And make it very clear to the person who supervises you and is asking you to do this additional work that you expect to get some benefit from it. And if not, then once again, you're kind of having to evaluate, are my values a mismatch with this company's values? And should I be looking for work somewhere else?
Wonderful. So true. Fact of life, Yen says. Looks like
Yeah.
that was that was helpful for Sarah as well. So wonderful. Julie, I just want to thank you so much for all of the wisdom that you've shared. I know we threw some hard questions at you, and so I appreciate your wise and thoughtful response to all of our Q&A this afternoon. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and your wisdom of how you've navigated career advancement in the corporate sector, and specifically sharing how you did that as a woman of faith. That's something that's really near and dear to all of our hearts, and something that we hope to emulate in our own careers as young women professionals. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm just going to say a quick word as we wrap up here today about our next session. So, our next session in this series is going to be taking place on January 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be presented by our CWFL Advisory Council member, Palwasha Kakar, who's currently at the United States Institute of Peace. And she's going to be presenting on a session called It Takes a Village, so fostering spiritual support in the midst of international work. So how do you foster that kind of spiritual community and support when your job is taking you around the world and back? So the link for that is up in the chat box. You can use that to enter the open webinar on January 18th. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for all of your wonderful questions. Thank you.